Okay. Okay, so let's start with our bracha, and then you can mute yourselves. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, our Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and given us the mitzvah of studying and engaging with Torah. Okay. So I can, amen. Let me see. So everyone, I can mute everyone. Maybe I'll just do, where is that? No, that's the chat. Hang on. Participants. Here we go. Mute all, but you can unmute whenever you have something to say. And I would like you to do that, please. Okay. All righty. So the arc of the class, I always like to tell, sort of let people know what's going on. Is that I'll do a very brief review of Mussar for anybody who wasn't here last week, very brief. And we'll talk about the 4 steps, because the thing is, when you study Mussar, it's the same technique that you use. So that's why I think it's worth just reviewing a little bit what the technique is. And then we'll talk about this week's trait, which is patience. And then we're going to use the story of the golden calf to actually talk about patience in different ways, because it's a great story from the Torah, and I think everybody's familiar with it. Anyway, so first I wanted to make space for reactions to trust. If anyone had any reactions to the trust, or anyone tried to work on their trust, or does anybody have anything to share about the trust trait that we worked on last week? And I'll go first just to break the ice. And it's funny that Letty just asked me about my booster shot. I had the booster shot on Friday morning, and I went to shul Friday night. I co-officiated with Rabbi Mishkin at the Kabbalat Shabbat. And then about 10 o'clock at night, just like last time, the ton of bricks, it was the fatigue and this incredible headache. That I get sinus headaches all the time, but this is the type of a headache that I never had before. And thank God it was from the shot. I can only imagine, God forbid, if I got the virus. Anyway, so because my father died of a brain tumor, okay, so if I get a headache and then I take a couple of Advil and it doesn't go away, I get a little anxious, because even though I say to myself, it's not what my father had, but it just, it's sort of it's in me. So I had to lean into trust last week. I got that headache, and of course I took the Advil, and I said, okay, this is, no, we can deal with the fear and the anxiety, because that's what the trust was all about. And I was going to lean into it. And I said, okay, I'm not going to be, let those emotions run me. I'm going to lean into my trust, to my bitachon, that's what this is. And by Saturday night, I felt better, thank God, by Motzei Shabbat. So it was funny, because we had just talked about this on Thursday night, and I had my shot Friday morning. And by Friday night, I was sort of leaning into doing the bitachon, and it was interesting. So I don't know if anybody else had any experience. I would love to hear if somebody wants to share an experience that they had. Okay, so or maybe you have an experience and you don't want to share it, but I'm just saying that these are the things that we think about. That's what I love about Mussar, because it's stuff that actually it comes up in our daily lives. So just a quick recall from last week, and that the idea of that Mussar is studying that we do that helps us go from things that we know in our heads and our intellect to our heart. Mussar is the bridge between the head and the heart. The Mussar was started by Rabbi Salanter in the mid-1800s. He was trying to reach people where they were. And he said it wasn't enough to just study with our minds, that we had to use our hearts and our souls. And instead of trying to change other people, Mussar is about trying to change ourselves. If you remember, we read that story about the Chafetz Chaim, and he was asked how he became such an influential leader. And he said, I set out to change the world and I failed. I set out to change the Jewish community and I failed. Then I set out to change my family and I failed. And then I realized I have to change myself. And that's how I was able to make a difference in the world. So Mussar is not only about learning Torah, about studying text, but about acquiring Torah, about becoming, as we said, an extraordinary, ordinary individual. Right? We're not trying to make tzaddikim, not trying to make us all the righteous people, just trying to make us the best version of ourselves. And that Mussar is about how to be rather than how to do. In the world of Mussar, God gives us all a spiritual curriculum, a character trait that shows up in our lives over and over and over. For some people, it's patience. For some people, it's anger. For some people, it's loving kindness. For some people, there are different traits, and it's always the same trait. When you think about we think about Yom Kippur, right? In Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we generally are asking God to forgive us for the same things every year. We say, God, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be more patient. I'm going to be more this or more that. And it's always the same thing every year because that's our spiritual curriculum. That's what and each one of us has something like that. There are the four components of Mussar is that we study text, and then we journal, whether we journal literally by writing it down or we keep it in some record in our minds. And then we share our ideas with others for feedback and evaluation. And then we either repeat sacred phrases or we take on different kabbalot, different practices that help us work on the trait during the week. So with that review in mind, let's jump into this week's trait, which is sablanut, which is patience. Sablanut means patience in Hebrew. In Israel, if anybody, I know you've all been to Israel, but I don't know if you've ever had the experience where somebody says to you, Sablanut, Geveret, Sablanut, like you should have patience. You could be waiting online to buy something in the shuk, or you're going into a restaurant, or you're waiting for a bus, and it's always Sablanut, and the way they say Sablanut, you just got to have patience. You have to have patience. So Sablanut means patience, but Sablanut, all Hebrew words come from a three-letter root. That's what makes Hebrew so interesting, unlike English. You can do so many things with the Hebrew language because you take that root and you can make different words out of it. I'm just trying to think, can't think of a good example. Oh, okay. So somebody, I had a Brit Milah in our house quite a number of years ago, and I didn't want everybody going upstairs, so I put a huge plant on the second stair, and then a little landing on the stairs, and everybody knew they couldn't go upstairs. So a friend of mine came over to me and she said, in Hebrew, she says to me, so if you hear that satem, she's always using she says, oh, that's the thing that blocks off the blocked off area. But just by using the word in a different way, using the root in a different way, you can say so many things in Hebrew that you can't say in English, which take many more words to say in English. Anyway, so the Hebrew root of saval, savlanut, it means patience. It means to bear, as in bearing a burden. It also means tolerance, to have and also means to suffer and to endure. And also, it's the same word for the porter who carries the goods. So in a sense, patience is not just about waiting, but it's about bearing the burden that is thrust on us, even if we don't want it, and even if that we don't have control over it. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a lot of sources for tonight. So I'm actually going to share my screen and probably leave it on the screen share for a while. So I won't be able to see you if you raise your hand. So if you have something to say, I want you to feel free to just unmute yourself and say what you want to say. And some of these I will read myself, and some of them I will ask other people to read. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel Levin, who is the author of the Cheshbon HaNefesh, which is Considering Our Souls, a classic Mussar test, he says, woe to the pampered one who has never been trained to be patient. Either today or in the future, he is destined to sip from the cup of affliction, which is so interesting because, we think of, if you don't have patience, but we don't think of not having patience as afflicting ourselves. But as we're going to see, that's pretty much what we wind up doing to ourselves. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Satanov, another Mussar teacher, defines the trait of sablanut, of patience, When something bad happens to you and you did not have the power to avoid it, do not aggravate the situation even more through wasted grief. Okay. And that's what he's talking about. They're talking about when I get frustrated with myself, when I don't have patience, and I'm sure other people do as well. But it's more than just frustration. You put yourself into a place that's not really good for you to be in, a sort of an unhealthy psychological space for you to be in. When about ourselves, I'm saying when we don't have patience, how we feel about ourselves. So what do you think is the biggest challenge we all face today with sabbalah, with patience? Why is patience in such short supply today? If anybody has an idea, please unmute yourself, because I think a lot about that. Why? Who's speaking? Is someone speaking? I thought someone was unmuting. No, okay. Okay. So
I think it's the digital culture is part of it, and the kind of television that we watch as children. We're so used to typing something in and getting the results immediately. I was a librarian, and at the beginning, I taught people how you look things up in the card catalog, and then you go to the shelf, and sometimes you go to an encyclopedia to look something up, and sometimes it's not there, and you'll go to another encyclopedia. You need a degree of patience for that. Now people just type something into Google. It might not be the best source. And if you don't get something up immediately, you get impatient because you're used to getting this stuff immediately. And this is what a lot of the children today have grown up with this kind of culture. And I think that's away from patience. That's one of the things that takes away from patience.
Yep. If patience is a virtue, it's one that we have all but lost. Living in a point and click world, we've grown accustomed to instant gratification. Just what you said, Sandy. We spend our days in a rush, multitasking so as not to waste a minute, and our brains, as study after study has shown, are becoming addicted to the endorphin rush of the internet. Fast food, internet messages, on-demand TV shows. We want what we want, and we want it now. That's the society that we're living in now. So what is the problem with wanting everything now, right? Impatience makes, right? If we're impatient, does that make anything happen faster? If you're waiting online, you're at the supermarket and you get impatient, are the people in front of you going to move faster? No. In fact, just to aggravate you, they may go more slowly, right?
But it'll seem slower if you're impatient. Everything will seem to be going more slowly if you're impatient. I just kind of in the supermarket because I was rushing back to get here in time, but it feels like it's moving. It feels like it's moving much more slowly.
Right, and impatience for Mussar. Impatience has been compared to an inner blaze, an inner fire that only gets bigger. And just like a fire consumes all the oxygen, impatience consumes us from the inside. Okay. If you've experienced being impatient, which of course we all have, it's a short leap from being impatient to becoming enraged. Right. And we know what people, even ourselves, are capable of doing when they're feeling raged. Okay. Now, I just want to point out that there are times when impatience is a good thing. Okay. If we witness suffering or abuse or injustice, we need to act and not just rely on sort of a wait and see attitude, right? We can't be patient with other people's suffering, real suffering. We're talking in Mussar about being patient when it's our own burden that we're bearing. Okay. So as Jews, excuse me, we're supposed to imitate God. We're supposed to imitate God's best attributes, okay? And one of God's best attributes is patience. And God is very patient. In fact, it's one of the 13 attributes that we sing on the holidays. If you recall, every time we open the Ark on a holiday, on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we sing 3 times, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Emet. Those are God's 13 attributes. And Erech Apayim, okay, that's, we're saying, when we say those words, we're saying, Adonai, Adonai, God who is merciful and compassionate, patient, abounding in love and faithfulness, assuring love for thousands of generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, and granting pardon. That's what we're saying when we open up the ark. And it's such an important prayer that we repeat it 3 times, right? A lot of the important prayers, the really important prayers, are repeated 3 times. Think about Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur. We say that 3 times also. Anyway, the Erech Apayim means slow to anger, okay? Because patience or impatience leads to anger. And how do we know that God is patient with us? Well, because God lets us live, despite all the things that we do. Can imagine, like, think of how impatient we get. God gets impatient with us also. We see it over and over again in the Torah. God gets impatient with Moses. God gets impatient with the children of Israel. God gets impatient a lot, but then God realizes God also calms God's self down and realizes that we don't mean it, right? Sometimes we do things we can't help it. Just like we love our kids, we get impatient with not just our kids, our partners, our spouses, our family. We get impatient with them, but we find a way to get over it because we love them and God loves us. So the underlying issue with a lack of patience is the reactivity, right? It's not just that we're impatient, it's how we react. And very often, sometimes we really have a problem. We're late for an important meeting or a doctor's appointment, and we really do need to do something right away. So again, I'm going to quote from this book, which I mentioned last week, Everyday Holiness, which is a great book if you want to read up about Mussar. A lot of deep thoughts, but written in very easily accessible language. So Alan Marinis writes, but whatever the problem, no matter how great or small, it's one thing to face those life issues just as they are, and quite another to slop grief, worry, regret, impatience, and other such mental condiments, I love that expression, all over the situation. Reactions like these only increase our burden by adding a whole extra dimension of inner suffering and often hurtful behavior to an already difficult situation, right? So think of the situations that try your patience. I don't know. Anybody, what are the situations that you would say try your patience the most?
The children.
Children. Excellent.
Traffic.
What else? I heard children twice. Yes. What else?
Traffic.
Traffic. Yes. Who said that?
Me.
Irene. Traffic for sure. What else? What would be another top? Let's say the top 3. We have children, traffic, and what else would you say?
People who are inconsiderate about time and appointments.
Oh my God. Just had something like that happen this afternoon with my daughter.
Taking care,
That gets me. That gets
taking
me.
care of the elderly.
Oh, Ronnie, thank you for saying that. My mom has Alzheimer's, and I really have to tap into my patience when I not even just take care of her, when I visit her. Thank you for saying that. I didn't even think of that, but you're so right. So in many situations, we can do all the things that are right? We plan, we were careful, but things come up unavoidably. This happens all the time. And the idea is, according to Mussar, these things that happen, that all the things that we just talked about that aggravate us, God has given us what's called a remedial program for that. And our remedial program is patience. All of those things that we just talked about, if we could work on our patience, that would be so helpful. So in other words, patience is not only a virtue, but patience is a gift from God that helps us deal with situations that are not within our control, right? You have an important meeting in the city. If you don't leave yourself enough time and there's traffic, you're going to lose your patience. And I don't know about you, but I would lose patience at myself. Like, why didn't I leave earlier? Why did I think I could get there in an hour when I should have left 2? But sometimes you actually leave yourself 2 hours, right? You have plenty of time to get to that appointment. And then there's construction on the bridge, or there's something going on, and all of a sudden 2 lanes are closed, and you really you can just feel what's going on inside of you. And that's what the Mussar is all about, to just recognize what's going on inside of you at that moment, because we get all riled up at that moment. But what are we supposed to do about it? Right? There's no one you can get mad. You're going to get mad at the bridge. You're going to get mad at the construction workers. We need to take a deep breath. And just like we said last week, we need to give it to God, right? We just need to give it over, right? We can either get angry about when we don't have control over these things, the plane is late or whatever's going on, or we can just give it up and say, I'm just not going to make myself crazy about this. So what does Mussar as a practice teach us about how to actually handle this, handle our impatience? So Alan Marinis from Everyday Holiness, he says that it usually takes a split second for the glowing embers of impatience to become anger, right? But before we even realize what's happening, we get that way. Someone cuts us off, we get angry. We talked about that. So let me go to source 6 for 7. Okay. When you find yourself in a situation that's triggering your impatience, instead of giving all your attention and energy to finding fault with the person who is so clearly at fault, right? That's what we think anyway. You can choose to be patient and take responsibility for your emotional response to the situation. You make the choice of whether you buckle or call on your patience to help you bear the burden. That's why it's called savlanut, because we have to bear the burden of the situation. This awareness and exercise of choice is called opening the space between the match and the fuse, right? Try not to fly off the handle, because when we lose our patience, we get angry. And when we're angry, we don't do what's in our best interest. And the only way to have patience reserves to call on is to practice being patient when we don't really need it, right? We have to cultivate our awareness to how we're feeling reacting to a situation. And we have to recognize those first feelings of impatience and not take a match to the fuse, okay? So I'm going to skip to the end source, because there are these great practices from my teacher, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, also a conservative rabbi, and she teaches a lot of Mussar classes. So I'm looking for source 13. Here we go. Mussar practices to help us learn patience, which I think were great. So it says one is each morning, I will choose in advance a period of time during the day that I anticipate will be hard to bear. And before that time comes, I will call my sacred phrase to mind and carry it with me into that experience. So we'll go there. We talked about sacred phrases last week, and there are some that I'll show you at the end. But, if you think about, even if it's not a sacred phrase, if you just think about, let's just say, I'm in a hurry and I have to go to the supermarket, and I know it's not going to go fast enough. So I talk to myself in the car before I leave the car, and I say, I'm going to try to be calmer in this situation. Okay. Or I will wait for number 2. I will watch for moments of I can't stand this during my day. And when I notice that happening, I will sit down and spend 3 to 5 minutes breathing with my sacred phrase. And even if you don't use a sacred phrase, if you sit down and you breathe and you inhale slowly in through the nose, out through the mouth, it helps calm you down. I'm told that 5 deep breaths like that can actually lower your blood pressure. I had one teacher at JTS and Rabbinical School. He always started our class, everybody taking in 5 deep breaths. Breathe in and breathe out. He said it would lower our blood pressure. The third possibility is when I encounter my difficult person, right? The one who is hard for me to bear. Sometimes then that person is me, right? Ourselves. I will move into breathing with my sacred phrase. So if you're going to go, it's Thanksgiving is coming up, and you're going to see your brother, your uncle, your aunt, the person that just gets under your skin, no matter what they say or do, they get under your skin. You just you have to center yourself and say, I'm not going to let that person get to me. I'm going to do my breathing. And then the fourth one is when I catch myself berating myself unreasonably, I will close my eyes and spend 3 to 5 minutes imagining God as generous and loving, right? So in other words, we imagine ourselves as a person worth loving. And if God can love us, of course, we can love ourselves as well. So I really love these these practices because they really, I do them. I wouldn't say I do them. I don't do them often enough, and I don't do all of them, but I find that they're helpful. The idea of stopping and breathing is really extremely helpful.
Excuse me, I don't remember the sacred phrases from last week.
Well, the sacred phrases from last week had to do with trust. There are different sacred, well, I'll show you here. Let's see, where are my sacred phrases? Okay, here are possible sacred phrases. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. One is the one we just said, the Adonai Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, right? That's one possible sacred phrase. Who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity and remitting transgression? Who has not maintained your wrath forever against the remnant of your own people? Because God loves kindness. That's from Micah. Bear the burden with the other, from Pirkei Avot. That's a nice short one. Make God's will your own, also from Pirkei Avot. Acknowledge God in the struggle. That's from the Talmud, right? So that's actually, you know, I'm having a hard time with this. God, can you please, could you help me? Can you help me not get angry with my brother, not lose my patience with my son, not lose, you know, whatever you're going to lose patience over. Ask God to be your partner in that. And don't withhold your goodness from the other, right? That's really hard. And we're going to have, there's a really great source that we're going to talk at the end about that, about how we can assume that if we don't like how someone is treating us, we assume that it's coming from their place of a place of their own pain, not something that's really directed at us. That's also really hard, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. Like I can send you these. This is part of the handicap of doing this on Zoom. If we were in person, I would be handing this out to everybody, and then you would have all these things. And I'm happy to email them the sources if you'd like. If you just send me a quick email saying, please email me the sources, I'll be happy to do so.
Could I interject something?
Sure.
It's Barbara.
Yes.
So this is not about patience, but is this the famous Rabbi Amy Eilberg, the first?
Yes.
The
Yeah,
first.
you know.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
yes. She was one of the first. I think she was the first conservative, a female conservative rabbi ordained. Yeah.
Well, one of the things she mentioned is taking a specific time in the day. And this is not about patience. This is about Lashon Hara.
Okay,
So
which is next week's topic. That's next week's topic.
But she, I used to carpool with several members of the temple to JTS on Mondays. And very often the whole topic of conversation would be what happened at services and who did you see and who wasn't there and maybe she's sick and all that stuff. But it was a fine line. And we did make a rule that during this carpool, during that period of time, absolutely no Lashon Hara.
No talking about people.
And was good, because then if it was sort of veering that way, then the other person would call us on it. So her idea of picking a time is a good one.
Right. I love her teaching. I love studying with Amy. Anyway, but Lashon Hara, how we use our speech, that's next week's topic. So Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto wrote Misilat Yesharim, which is Path of the Just, which is also a very important Mussar book. And most of these books are translated into English because, again, like I said at the beginning, Mussar is for popular. They want everybody should be able to access this. This is not for people who only know Hebrew, who only study Talmud. It's for everybody. That's the whole idea. So he talks about anger. Okay, there's an anger-prone person about whom our sages said, whoever gets angry is like an idol worshiper. The person gets angry about anything that is done against their will. They become filled with wrath till their heart is no longer with them and their judgment is lost. A person like this would suffice to destroy the whole world if they had the ability, for the intellect does not rule over them in the least. Right? And we have seen how much mayhem and destruction have we seen in this world just in our lifetimes because of people who are angry. I'm not going into a political thing about if they couldn't get the guns or whatever. I'm not going to go into that. But I'm talking about the anger that people feel, the anger. And I guess sometimes people could say maybe some of the anger is justified because they live in horrible circumstances, and I get that. But I remember my father, may he rest in peace. he would say, "I don't understand." He grew up poor. Like he came home from school and he would find the furniture on the sidewalk because they had been dispossessed. He said, "I don't understand. I grew up in poverty. There was anti-Semitism, and I never dawned on me to steal, to act out in anger, and to hurt people, to steal." He said, I put my nose to the grindstone and I just made something of myself." So I understand that there's real injustice in the world, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you can use it as an excuse. But the anger is what causes so much mayhem in this world. It just does. Okay, so this is also, I think, was very interesting when I read about this. When we feel impatient for whatever's going on, what's this all about? Okay, I want to read what Alan Marinas has to say about this. It's a little bit long, this one, but I think it's super interesting. "We only burn with the fire of impatience when the focus of the situation is on me. You are delaying me. You're misleading me. You're berating me. You're interfering with my plan or standing in the way of my needs. Sometimes the only inner voice I can hear is my own ego, loudly promoting all its important needs and plans and drowning out any other voice that might whisper within. We all tend to see ourselves as the prime actor in a drama that swirls around us. Some of us believe that all the heavy action is playing out according to a script we ourselves have written. Others see it the opposite way, playing the victim to the forces that press in on their own little stronghold, right? Oh, poor me, why are you doing this to me? Despite the obvious difference, both of these attitudes see the whole of life pivoting around a separate identity that stands at the center of a very personal universe. The Mussar teachers encourage us to contemplate and understand our rightful place in the universe. This helps us avoid getting all worked up when things don't go just precisely as we'd like. So to conquer impatience, we have to remember it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about us, right? How many times have you seen two people talking and then they stop talking when you come in the room and you think, oh, they must have been talking about me? They're not. Maybe they were just talking about some private thing and they didn't want you to know about it. Or maybe they just stopped talking because you walked in the room and they wanted to say hello to you. Like the idea of giving someone the benefit of the doubt, and especially when it comes to us, that we to not think that it's always about us. Because that's when we lose our patience, right? I say to myself, oh, whatever line I get in at Stop and Shop, that's the one that starts to move slowly. Or that's when the cashier has to tally up her money and change, right? It's not about me. This is when she's changing her thing. It just feels that way, but it's not about me. It's not about us, okay? We have so little control over so many things in our lives. So why should we make ourselves suffer? That's what the trait of Sablanut is teaching us. When we slip into impatience, we make ourselves suffer needlessly. Forget about how impatience makes the other person feel. Concentrate on how getting impatient makes us feel, right? That's why we should forget. It just makes us not feel good, right? And it's interesting that the converse, patience, goes hand in hand with kindness. If we are patient towards other people, we can treat them with kindness, which is so important. It's a beautiful story in the Talmud, okay, about Rav Preda. Rav is the Hebrew word for rabbi. Rav Preda had a student who was so slow that he could not grasp a lesson until his teacher taught it to him 400 times. One day, while Rav Preda was teaching the student, someone came in and told the rabbi that he needed his services when he finished teaching. So that day, after he completed the 400th repetition of the lesson, and I'm sure that this is not literal. I'm sure it wasn't 400 times. Maybe it just seemed like 400 times, but the rabbis are telling us that he said it many times. So after he finished the 400th repetition of the lesson, Rav Preda asked the student if he had grasped the lesson, to which the student replied that he hadn't. Why is it different than the other days? The teacher asked. The student answered that from the moment the other person had come to speak to the rabbi, the student had been distracted, thinking to himself, soon the master will have to get up and leave. Soon the master will have to get up. And Rav Preda replied, if so, then let me teach you the lesson again. And he repeated the teaching an additional 400 times. When he finished, a heavenly voice called out to Rav Preda, which reward do you want? Either 400 years will be added to your life, or you and your generation will be received in the world to come. And he answered, that's not about me. I request that my generation and I merit the world to come. And to this, the heavenly voice replied, give him both. Such are the fruits of patience. He had such patience toward this teacher. And I'm thinking, Ronnie, what you said about, being patient till the elderly, sometimes I have to tell my mother the same thing over and over and over again. Okay. And I've decided to look at that as a positive. Sometimes I'll go visit my mom and I want to stay with her for a couple of hours. And it's not always easy to find things to talk about. And I said to myself, I can tell her the same things because she doesn't remember. And for her, it's new information. So my daughter Hannah is getting married. So I went over, I tell her over, and then I tell her what we're doing. We're looking for a dress. We have some music. We have a plays, right? And then I realized 10 minutes later, I talk about the same thing. And she's so delighted to hear all this information because this is new information for her. And it just, when I let the patience rule, I treat my mother with so much more kindness. We treat everybody with more kindness when we do that. And so we've talked about having kindness toward other people. We also have to have kindness towards ourselves. We have to have kindness and patience for ourselves. There's a beautiful quote in the Talmud here that says, grasp too much and you will achieve little. I forgot to write the other part of it. Grasp a little and you will catch it. So it's saying, if you try to do everything at once, like if you try to do multitasking, which I'm particularly bad at, it doesn't work. If you do one small thing at a time, you'll achieve it, right? So when you try to grab too much in life, whatever the too much is, I'm talking about multitasking, but sometimes, we get greedy about things. And I don't even mean physical things. I mean, we want to do everything and you can't do everything. You do one thing at a time and it works. Hey, I did that thing. Okay, now I'll go to the next thing. That's also about employing our own patience. So how do you think that the practice, and it's not just patience, right? Same thing with compassion. If we have compassion for ourselves, we will have compassion for others. If we feel loving about ourselves, we will feel loving towards others. If we like ourselves, we'll like others. It's a mirror reflection. We see ourselves in other people and other people see themselves in us. So how do you think that the practice of sablanut, of patience, might help us to judge ourselves less harshly for not doing enough? And I have to tell you, as women, I don't know as many men who feel this way, but women, we think if we don't do it all, that we're not okay. We have such a hard time letting go of the fact that we're not doing it all, and we drive ourselves crazy sometimes because we don't have patience with our own limitations. So I'm asking you if you have any thoughts on that.
I haven't thought about that.
Sure, Barbara.
This is Barbara. So when I retired from my corporate life, and my husband retired shortly thereafter. We made a rule, very hard to follow, but we made a rule. Don't put more into a day than the day can hold. And actually, I have stuck to that pretty much for a long time. But it works against patience, because if you have a clear idea, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do this, I'm going to go shopping, I'm going to go bake, and then I have the doctor's appointment, and then I have a class. You have the whole thing, it's not more than the day can hold. But then when one of those things, so you did what you just said. You had compassion on yourself. You didn't put too much into the day. But
Right.
then one of those things went wrong. There was a big delay in the doctor's office, or all the cashiers broke down at once in the supermarket, or whatever it was.
Right.
Then it sort of backfires on you.
Well, you
Anyway.
can make plans that you want, it's like goes under, man plans and God laughs, right? You can make
No,
the
but
plan.
I'm saying, I think it's possible to plan not to do too much. I think it's possible to plan to have compassion on yourself by not trying to do it all.
Right. And also, if the day doesn't go well, have compassion on yourself that you didn't make a bad plan.
Right.
Right.
I have a lot of, people who know me longer than you do have heard me quote Peg Bracken, who used to say, "These are my declining years. That means I can decline to do anything that I don't want to do." And last night, somebody asked me to do something that I really didn't want to do. It involved a person that I don't like, and I never wanted to have anything to do with again. And I just said no. Because
Good
I
for
know
you.
I don't have the patience to deal with that person.
That's right. And I've also learned, a friend of mine who's a psychologist taught me, she said, no is a complete sentence. Sometimes you can say to somebody no, and you don't have to give 7,000 reasons why I'm not a bad person for saying no, because look at all these reasons I have. You're allowed to say no. So,
Rabbi,
yes, Letty.
there's not a great deal wonderful about getting old, but one of the things that I've learned is my sacred mantra is lighten up and don't take yourself so seriously. And many times I'll say that you're not the center of the world, lighten up. And I find that as I got older, it worked better for me. And I have a lot more patience because I just try not to take myself that seriously. And it works lots of times, not all the time, but it does.
You are a Mussar expert and you didn't even know it, because you're saying all the things that he was saying. It's not about me, lighten up, breathe, catch myself, you're doing it already, Letty. Good for you.
Trying.
That's why it's work. That's why Mussar is work, because we always have to work at it. If it were easy, there wouldn't be all these books about all these things.
The thing that helps me, this is Susan speaking,
Hi,
is
Susan.
to say it's really not that important. You really, if you put it in a larger context of all the other things going on, it takes a lot of pressure off of you to say it's not important, it can happen tomorrow, it doesn't have to happen at all. And by the way, it's one of the great benefits of retirement that you really never have to rush again.
That's great. I have to keep that in mind. But it's true. It's that's another phrase that's very popular in Israel. Zelo chashuv. It's not important. Zelo chashuv. It's not important. You have to figure out what's important and what's not important. And a lot of the things we used to think were important, especially I think this pandemic has really helped a lot of people refocus on what's important and what's not important, and talk about patience. How patient did we have to be, especially that first, however many months it was, maybe close to a year, 9 months, when we were stuck at home and there was no vaccine, and we just had to wait around. We had to wait around for there to be a vaccine so that we could start to go out. Then we started to go out. Then there was another, the Delta virus, but we had to wait. That waiting is so hard. That patience. For anybody, I'm sorry.
I have
Yeah.
a phrase also, getting back to what Susan said. She says it's not that important. My phrase, which I developed years ago, and I found it really, really wonderful, is It's not my job. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, if somebody does a cruel, unkind thing, if somebody behaves in a way that I feel is going to be harmful to the world, I don't judge them. I studied counseling, and one of the things we learned was to be non-judgmental. And I just have this attitude: if somebody cuts me off, whatever their problem is, it's not my job to deal with it. I don't have to think about them. I don't have to judge them. I don't have to let that impinge on my life and hurt my life because I get angry at what some people are doing. Now, if it impinges on, like on the world, like the climate and that kind of thing, I still have difficulty dealing with that. But as far as traffic things and little things you notice in people, little cruelties that you notice in people, I just let it go and say, it's not my job to deal with it. That's, I guess last week you had the phrase, which is similar to what the Alcoholics Anonymous phrase is: let go and let God.
Right.
It's not my job. It's not my job, and I'm not gonna take it on as my job.
Right. You don't have to fix it. Right.
And it's not right. It's not my problem. And so as I said, I have found that to be very, very helpful and to alleviate a lot of anger that I had felt when I was younger. And by the way, I wish I would have had this when my children were little, because I probably could have used it very much then. But
I have a saying that I've used since my kids were babies, and that
Yeah.
was, and this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Because their teeth will come in, they'll stop drinking from a bottle, they'll learn
They'll
how
sleep
to
through the
walk.
night. They'll sleep through the night. Right.
And it's the same thing with the pandemic, God willing, and this too shall pass, but we had to have a lot of patience until we got it. But when you think of the rapidity of how these vaccines got out, and now they have an antiviral drug as well, it's really a miracle, because
It
it
is a
took
miracle.
years for other vaccines to be developed. And we're even though we've been through all this, and unfortunately 5 million people have died from it, but considering, it's just incredible that they could have developed that and gotten it out so fast, and so many people are willing to take the vaccine. So we were patient to a point, but they really expedited that, and I think we should really thank God for that.
Oh, I do every day. I remember when, I'm sure I'm not the only person, I mean, a lot of people, when I got that first shot, I was crying. I said, Shechianu, and I said a blessing for the technician who gave it to me. I mean, it was a very moving moment. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I really appreciate that. That this is part of what Mussar is. That right, first you study the text, you journal, you think about your experiences, and you get the feedback and evaluation from colleagues and friends and people you trust. So I want to take a look at Sablanut and patience in light of the golden calf. Now we know this. I'll just two sentences. The story of the golden calf is that about a month after the Israelites left Egypt, they were at the base of Mount Sinai, and Moses went up Mount Sinai for 40 days, and he came down, and he went to get the 10 Commandments, the Torah. He came down, and the people they thought that Moses wasn't coming back. He wasn't coming back. And they built the golden calf. Well, they said to Aaron, Moses left his brother Aaron in charge. He said, And they said, you know, we have to do something. He saw the people were getting crazed. So they wound up building the golden calf, although there's so many midrashim. I mean, all the women took off their gold, and how they smelted and melted all this gold in the desert, I don't know. But the calf, you know, Aaron says, well, the calf just came out of it. So there's so many different, you know, midrashim and stories to how that what actually happened. So that's the basic story. So I want to look at a couple of modern day rabbis. We're going to look at two modern day rabbis, and who they looked at the golden calf through the lens of sablanut, of patience, or the lack of there. The first one sees the story of the golden calf through the eyes of the Israelites, and the second one talks about the golden calf through the eyes of Moshe, of Moses. I just say that the sin of the golden calf is found in Parshat Ki Tisa in the book of Shmot, which we'll be reading probably in February. I have a special affinity for Parshat Ki Tisa because that was my senior sermon in rabbinical school, and I also wrote about the sin of the golden calf, but not through the lens of Sablanut. There are so many ways to look at the sin of the golden calf. So we're going to look at Rabbi Carl Perkins and Rabbi Paul Lewin and see what they, whoops, why isn't this moving? There, we see what they had to say. Okay, Rabbi Carl Perkins, who's a conservative rabbi, and his daughter actually was one of my classmates in rabbinical school. For those of you who don't know, I think maybe you all do, but I was a second career. I was ordained 3.5 years ago. So some of my classmates are actually younger than my students when I went, younger than my kids when I went to rabbinical school. And his daughter was one of those young women. Actually, she went to college with one of my daughters. Anyway, we can learn something from the experience of our ancestors during their journey through the wilderness. Just a month or so after the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, they arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses left them to go up to the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments. I'll be back after 40 days, he said, according to a midrash. Note the exact language. I'll be back after 40 days. On the morning of the 40th day, they looked up the mountain expectantly. Where is he? When is he coming down? And all morning long they waited. No Moses. Finally, their murmurings took a turn. He's not coming back. He's not coming back at all. In desperation, they turned to Aaron to build for them a golden calf. And then, as they were worshiping it, Moses appeared. He was angry. He said, I was coming back after 40 days. They had assumed that he was coming back on the morning of the 40th day, whereas he had meant that he was coming back after 40 complete days. If only they had waited that extra half day. Lack of patience on the part of the Israelites led to a catastrophe. It's clear that the stakes of impatience are high, right? And I never thought of it quite like that. I mean, they just couldn't wait. And they were almost there. They waited 40 days. They just needed to wait another half a day, and they were not able to. So what could they have done differently? Like when the Israelites got all excited, what could they have done differently? And also, what could Moshe, their leader, have done differently? What could have been done differently so that this catastrophe of the golden calf didn't happen? Anybody have? I don't have an answer to that. I'm sort of throwing that out there.
Maybe we have to be explicit when we say something, because he said after 40 days, maybe if he kind of explained what that was, then they wouldn't have been
Right.
looking for him. I think that's in life is like that. When someone's not explicit and it doesn't go the way you want, you get all like, no, well, I didn't think that's what you said, or something to that effect.
Right. So communication could have been better. Very good. I like that. Right. And the communication, which has two sides of it, the Moshe saying and the people hearing.
Maybe what he could have done in a ideal world was, I'm going up to the mountain. I'll be maybe 40 days, maybe longer. And while I'm gone, these are the things that you should do in preparation for my return. So they gets busy doing something, and they break into groups and they have to produce something or whatever it is, and then they'll all be ready for him when he comes back down.
That's really great, because when you think about it, when I'm really anxious about something or I'm impatient, if I can refocus onto something else, then the time goes much faster. Or I'm not thinking about the thing that I'm impatient about because I'm focused on something else. It's amazing that would have been. You're a very good leader, Rita. Well, Moses could have used you as the president of his congregation at the time.
Yeah, right. No more presidencies.
600,000 squabbling Jews, right? You would have loved that,
Yeah, right.
I'm sure. Right.
I would have turned gray.
Anyone else have anything to share? Otherwise, we'll go on to the other rabbi.
I have a question. So
Sure.
I understand this is a midrash, a modern midrash, but does the
Right.
Torah actually say that Moses said he was going for 40 days, or does it just say he was there for 40 days? The reason I
Well, he-
ask this,
Yeah.
I don't remember that the Torah says that he said in advance, because how did he know? I mean, did God tell him you're coming up here for 40 days? But there are many, and sometimes really tragic or difficult situations where we have to have patience for something that's going to take a very long time or may never happen, such as someone coming back
Right.
from somewhere,
Right.
or they might never come back.
Or
They're
sometimes
lost in a, they're
I'm
lost
sorry.
in a war, they're a missing person, or the person's in prison, whatever. I mean, this is a different level altogether. That's what I'm thinking, that Rabbi Perkins can say this in his midrash, but I'm not so sure the Torah told us this ahead of time.
You know something? I don't remember the text by heart, but that's a good question. I don't really remember. And I don't have a Tanakh in front of me right this second, but I think he did say, or you know what? Or maybe I'm confusing it with a midrash. I don't really remember, but that's a good point, Barbara. Thank you.
I don't think he did say it. I think they just got very impatient. I think that must be.
But why on the 40th? But why on the 40th day? Like, why not on the 39th day or the 38th day? There must have been a reason why it was the 40th day.
That's when their patience ran out.
Well, my patience would have run out long before 40 days, I'm sure. So I don't know.
Well, wait a minute. They would have had to collect the jewelry and melt down the gold and create the idol before they started worshiping it. So that they would have started. The patients would have run out before that.
Could be.
They started.
5 days, right? You know, I don't. You're right. I have no idea. I don't really.
It also has to do with expectation. If you know at a certain time something will happen, you can be patient to that point. But if it goes beyond that, then you start to lose your patience. So I think expectation has something to do with it.
I think that's Nancy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, as I can't see people. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a really good point. I think that must be why they lost their patience. In other words, if they said 45 days, they would have waited 45 days and then lost their patience. They must have had a sense or known in some way, whether he said it or they knew, that that's when he was expected. That's a good point, Nancy. I like that. Thank you. So let's take a look now at Rabbi Paul Lewin, and he writes about this from the Patience from Moshe's point of view in this story. Okay, I did that. Okay, 39 days of silence. After the calf was destroyed, Moshe attempts to rebuild the relationship between God and the Jews. If you remember, God is, talk about angry, God is furious. I mean, there's Moses going down the mountain with the 10 Commandments that says, don't have other gods, don't worship idols. And, you know, this is, and it comes down. And in fact, God even says to Moshe, God saw what was going on. He says to Moshe, you better get down there because look what your people are doing. At that point, God has basically disowned us. He said, look what your people are doing. Okay. Anyway, so Moses attempts to rebuild the relationship because God was ready to destroy, to kill all the Israelites. The Torah describes how Moshe prays for 40 days for forgiveness for the people. Yet it's only on the 40th day that God answers, I forgive the people. Imagine the relief. Moshe has prayed longer than any other living person, and his prayers have been answered. Moshe will then go up the mountain and receive the second set of tablets. When we read this story, most of us focus on the fact that Moshe was successful in his prayers. However, the far bigger story was that the 39 days that he prayed and was met with silence. How many of us would have maintained our conviction, our motivation, our concentration, or our dedication to pray for 39 days without receiving an answer? That's the real story, the ability to maintain one's focus even in the absence of a response. However, Moshe did not lose hope. He did not fail in his faith. He maintained his conviction and was ultimately successful in restoring the relationship between God and the people. The lesson for us is clear. Results take time. They do not happen overnight, right? It's interesting, this connection between patience and hope. Patience and hope. So I never had made that connection until I read this. That hope is something that takes time. So there's more. He says, we live in a world of instant results. You need to answer a question, let's Google it. If something's too difficult, we don't bother with it. This is just one of the great illnesses of our time. This is not a new problem. Humanity has always lacked patience. This is interesting because I thought it was more the modern times. The Israelites couldn't wait for Moses and built the golden calf. We need to acknowledge that sometimes the answer requires patience. And I'm sure that God could have answered Moses immediately, but by delaying, God is teaching us that certain things need time to mature. Imagine if Moses had prayed once or twice and had not received an answer. He would have given up, and Jewish history as we know it would have ended. Rather, Moses' persistence rebuilt the relationship, which led to the building of the sanctuary, that's the Holy Temple, and ultimately the history of our people. I just thought that was beautiful. I had never thought of that story in terms of Moshe's incredible patience to wait for an answer from God. I mean, we pray every day. We don't know if our prayers are answered. That requires incredible patience on our side. So I have one more source that I want to share. Rabbi Jacob Stout, who's Reconstructionist, looks at Savlanut and patience through the personal lens and gives us great guidelines and suggestions for how to incorporate patience into our lives. So Rabbi Jacob Stout, he's a Reconstructionist and he's very much involved in the world of Mussar. He says, I seek to treat all people as though they are created in the divine image. I try to act lovingly towards them, even if it hurts. I assume they are doing the best they can. If they are misbehaving, I assume that they are themselves in pain, and I try to forgive them. This is incredibly gracious and generous on his part, right? Instead of, again, thinking about me, why you're doing this to me. In my pastoral training, we had a lot of training like this. When somebody is reacting to you, it's not about you. It's something that's going on inside of them. And it's very hard to make that separation and to treat them with kindness when they're not treating us with kindness. Patience, to my ear, has a different connotation in its contemporary North American usage. It's something you lose, something you possess in limited quantity. If you are patient, you do not get annoyed during a delay. You do not get angry when someone lets you down, and you do not explode when someone attacks you. Rather, you say and do nothing. You hold it in until you can't suppress your feelings any longer, and then you often explode, letting it out with a vengeance because you can't take it anymore. What if, instead of suppressing my anger or upset, I notice those feelings as they arise so that I'm able to consider the loving and wise way to address the cause of my pain? What if I begin by turning toward my wound compassionately? What if I seek to view the offending party as human, flawed, and in pain? So if somebody hurts us, I think you're in pain. That's why you're doing this mean thing to me. What if I am eventually able to discover a way to confront the other person in a way that allows him or her to hear my concern and my desire to forgive and reconcile? In my view, this approach requires a lot more strength than erupting or swinging wildly when someone offends us. Not that I think that this is easy to do. Recently, it took me over 3 years to figure out how to do this with someone who's very close to me. She had hurt me deeply, so much so that it was too painful for me to even talk on the phone. I certainly couldn't bear to be in her presence. I was resolved not to say or do anything hurtful to her out of my anger, but I could not find a way to move forward. She wanted very much to reconcile, but her attempts to do so inevitably led her to act in ways that were hurtful, that she couldn't see. Finally, it came to me that she was never going to figure this out on her own, but that I could tell her what I needed from her, what I needed her to say. I'm sorry I caused you so much pain. When I told her, she was grateful and she was happy to extend herself. Reflecting back on that experience, I learned that by bearing the pain caused by another without swinging back, I can also be empowered. As long as I feel like an injured victim, I will either express my anger or try to suppress it. But if I'm able to see myself as an agent who can change a situation, I have another choice: to act out of care and love, reaching out to connect and heal. This, I think, is the work that I and maybe all of us are called to do. Increase the holiness that comes from loving and constructive interactions. It's work that requires us to bear a substantial amount of suffering until we are able to act out of love, compassion, and open-heartedness. This is so beautiful. When I read this, this is transforming our hurt and suffering into love and compassion and open-heartedness. I mean, I don't know. If anyone has a reaction to this, I would love to hear, because I just thought this was beautiful. Very, very hard. I don't know that I could do what he does all the time, but even the fact that he was able to do it with one person who hurt him, and to realize that she was acting from a place of her own pain, wound, insecurities, maybe her own impatience, and he was able to transform his hurt in a way that was able to repair their relationship. I mean, I can't imagine what would be a better use of trying to work on your patience than something like that.
That's beautiful. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Rabbi, can I ask, do we have your email for if we want to ask for your sources?
It's Rabbi Perlman at tbi.org.
Rabbi Perlman is one word.
Right. Perlman with no A, Perlman at tbi.org. I'm happy to share them with anyone.
Rabbi attached. Rabbi Perlman, one word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. At tbi.org.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Were you talking about Moses and his patience that he didn't get an answer, but he kept on. You know, there are people in history that were the same. We're the same. You had people like Emily Dickinson, who continued writing her poetry for her whole life when nobody appreciated it, nobody volunteered to publish it. You had Van Gogh, who continued painting for his whole life when nobody would buy a painting, but he continued doing it. When you get no feedback from what you're trying to do, you continue to do it anyway. I think is really marvelous. And I think, a few special people are able to. Most of us can't, but I think a few special people are able. Moses could do it. And some really dedicated people can do it. But I think it's a beautiful idea. I mean, the idea of seeing from the other person's perspective, it's not about you. They're just taking it out on you.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to do if it's somebody that's close to you. But any counselor or psychologist or social worker learns to do that, because you get negativity. And if it's not and you don't touch it because you're just concerned about the person you're trying to help, you're not concerned about yourself.
Right.
I think
That's the take the eye out of it. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, if you had to describe your learning about Sablanut in one word or two words, what would you say? I'm just curious, what would be your takeaway from this?
To have more empathy.
What, empathy? Who said that? Is Rosalie?
Yeah, empathy.
Yeah,
I
empathy.
say
Anyone
lack
else?
of ego. I say lack of ego.
I would say it's a practice.
Absolutely, Dale. It's definitely a practice. It's work. It's hard work. Anyone else?
Chill, be chill.
What'd you say, Ann?
CHILL, chill, just relax.
Oh, to be chill,
Oh,
be chill,
chill.
absolutely, be chill. Yeah. Anyone else?
Have patience.
Have patience.
Or are you talking about patience or Mussar?
You have to have patience to have Mussar.
You have to have patience to have patience. It's true. You have to have patience with your own learning. Irene, if you're trying to say something, you're muted. I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
I was finished.
No, but I think Irene is trying to say something.
I have a little anecdote.
Sure.
Apparently, as a child, I was very impatient. And my mom always used to say to me, patience is a virtue. Virtue is a grace. Put the two together and you'll have a pretty face.
Well, it obviously worked. That's very sweet. That's very sweet. So I just really wanted to say, I'm sorry, someone else who's trying to say something.
I just said she had a wise mom.
Yeah. So my final thought is like, may the ever patient source of patience above bless us all with sablanut, with patience, with forbearance, and the ability to lengthen our fuse from impatience to anger, and to take deep breaths that help keep us balanced and calm. And let us say amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us. Next
Thank
week,
you, Rabbi.
next week's speech. Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you for coming. And next
Right.
Thursday night, we'll be talking about the use of speech.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi.